Spin, no bias, no censorship. I'm Dan Wootton. This is a special edition of Outspoken. And to mark the start of 2025, all week we are counting down the 50 worst of 2024 with my favourite members of the Outspoken family. And today, delighted to have two of my best guests from last year here with me. The Conservative commentator, Charlie Downes, in the house, and the owner and founder of True Conservative Media, Chris Davies. Please do click to subscribe to our brand new independent news source, turn on the notification bell, then you'll be alerted to our brand new live shows, uncancelled interviews, and special royal episodes. The best way to support Outspoken is by subscribing to a monthly paid membership. Then you get access to the uncancelled after show. It returns in less than 2 weeks' time, but you'll also get my exclusive reporting in columns, access to our live chats on the Substack app, and the chance to join a thriving community. Most importantly, Substack is a safe space, free of censorship. Your support from just £5 a month not only gives you that 30 minutes of extra content on weekdays with the after show, once we're back very shortly, it also allows me to continue making this independent daily news show. Don't worry though, I understand. Things are tough right now, aren't they? We know that. You can, of course, subscribe, sign up, be part of the community completely free as well. www.outspoken.live. But now, let's go. Charlie Downes, Chris Davies, Happy New Year. It's crazy, isn't it? Already in 2025. Any resolutions, Chris?
None that I'm going to keep, Dan. Plenty that I'll have broken by about 2 hours after the start of the new year. So no, none for me, I'm afraid, apart from maybe to keep it even more real.
Keep it even more real. I love that. Although you already do that, Chris. You already do that. What about you, Charlie?
Well, do you know what? I pride myself on my lifestyle. Like, I work out all the time and all that sort of thing. So I think I'm good in that department. But do you know what it is? It's just endlessly like scrolling through my phone, scrolling on Twitter or X or whatever, on YouTube, that sort of thing. I'm ashamed. When I look at my screen time at the end of the day most days, I'm like, oh my gosh, what have I been doing with my day? So, and I think about the amount of stuff I could get done in that time. So that's what it is.
Okay, reduce the doom scrolling. I like that. You can do that, and I'll have to go to the gym a bit more this year. Yeah, that was a bit of a fail for me in 2024. But if you're tuning in for the first time, we are well on the way in the 50 worst of 2024, looking at the moments, the people, and the phenomenons that made life very bad, not just in the United Kingdom, but around the world last year. And we're at number 20 now. And this was an extraordinary moment when the UK authorities threatened Elon Musk with arrest. Here's Mark Rowley, the chief of the Met Police.
We will throw the full force of the law at people. And whether you're in this country committing crimes on the streets or committing crimes from further afield online, we will come after you.
Talk to me about that, because we have seen some high-profile figures whipping up the hatred. You talked about it in there with the officers, in fact, about this being added to by online commentary. I mean, I'm even thinking of the likes of Elon Musk getting involved. What are you considering when it comes to dealing with people who are whipping up this kind of behaviour from behind a keyboard, maybe in a different country?
Being a keyboard warrior does not make you safe from the law. You can be guilty of offences of incitement, of stirring up racial hatred. There are numerous terrorist offences regarding the sort of publishing of material. All of those offences are in play if people are provoking hatred and violence on the streets, and we'll come after those individuals just as we will physically confront on the streets the thugs and the obs who are causing the problems for communities.
Charlie Downes, this was one of the most embarrassing moments for the UK internationally, because we knew who he was talking about. We knew who the keyboard warrior was. Oh yeah, just the richest guy in the world who's actually trying to shine a light on some of the authoritarian, totalitarian tactics being used by the British police. So I know, let's threaten him with arrest. Well, he just ended up embarrassing Mark Rowley, didn't he? Because he said, well, I'm just not going to come to the UK because they're probably going to end up arresting me.
Yeah, well, we have to remember the kind of national climate at the time. It was a very, very strange, unstable period for our country. And I think that the police really, I mean, the riots were disastrous, but the events that led to the riots were also catastrophic. It was just a really dark period of the year. But I think the police really got above their station, to be honest. Like those kinds of comments from Mark Rowley, where they're talking about policing, quote, keyboard warriors, which when I was growing up was a phrase that was completely, that was in the domain of the internet. The fact that that's spilled out over into real life now and is being used by high profile, agents of the state is kind of funny in and of itself. But Elon Musk, it's interesting the dynamic that we have with this particular individual, because I think there's a case to say that he as an individual is actually more powerful than the entire British state, in part because of his just the sheer amount of capital that he has behind him, but also his connections with the US government, obviously a lot more directly now that Trump has won the election in the US. But the idea, it just comes across like a petulant kid trying to go after someone who's way bigger than him, way older than him. And it was just really embarrassing, to be honest.
Chris Davies, what was your take on this?
Dan, it's David against Goliath, where David happens to be the richest man in the world. But for all the right reasons, David wins. I'm not even sure that Elon Musk would know who Mark Rowley is, and less still care. When you've spent the sort of money that he has to guarantee free speech across the globe, to have a whippersnapper from the Met Police backed by Sadiq Khan whipping at his heels, I'm sure Elon will rest easy in his bed at night.
Yes, indeed. Well, look, let's continue the countdown. Actually, this is one of the worst moments of the year, but it's also one of those moments that I take a lot of glee in. It makes me happy to relive this. It's election night in the US, and Rory Stewart, the centrist dad who presents alongside Alistair Campbell on The Rest is Politics, a guy who ridiculously used to claim that he was a conservative, gets it so wrong about Kamala Harris. Watch.
It does look like women have not turned out in the same numbers as expected for her.
No, it's completely fascinating. I mean, and of course, when a result happens, you rewrite history. If she was currently winning, we'd have a very good answer for why she was winning. Mm-hmm. Abortion would be number one. Yeah. Number two, she had much more money than he did.
3 times.
Number three, she had a real ground game. People were very clear. All my friends out in Pennsylvania, Michigan, Wisconsin, Trump's people were nowhere to be seen. Was swamped with Democrats, leafleting, hitting every door. We had Anthony say in the first part of the show that there were almost so many Democratic volunteers out, they couldn't even find doors for them to knock, right? Add to that a whole series of narratives about a campaign where she didn't really do anything wrong. She barely put a foot wrong during the campaign. And where Trump has been convicted of over 30 felonies, he's been responsible for the January 6th insurrection. You could provide a pretty good story for why she won, but she didn't. Which then means that we need to and my friend Lichtman, you were teasing me about my friend Lichtman, he also called it for Kamala Harris, and he would have said, no, it's nothing about that. It's also about the fundamentals. The economy was going reasonably okay in terms of GDP per capita. There were no major scandals. There were no major foreign policy catastrophes. So actually, in terms of basic competence over 4 years, the incumbent, Biden, had ticked a lot of boxes. So all of that.
Just the most extraordinary reaction. Chris Davies, what's more, remember Rory Stewart before that vote had said he'd happily bet £100,000 on the fact that she would win.
Yeah, it's bizarre. I mean, it's interesting where he was going through his little mental checklist there at the end. Biden did put a lot of ticks in a lot of boxes. Unfortunately, they were all the wrong boxes. A bit like Eric Morecambe playing the piano, all the right notes, just in the wrong order. And the same goes for Biden. Rory Stewart, really, he needs to stop doing what he does, opening his mouth without engaging his brain. And of course, he's egged on by Alistair Campbell because that suits the narrative. But he would be better off, I think, having a quieter 2025. I don't want to deprive him of a platform, Dan, because he gives me endless hours of amusement. But suffice to say, as I think you probably know, when it came to election night, I wasn't watching Channel 4. I wasn't watching Rory Stewart. And like you, I absolutely delighted in rubbing the noses of those that back the Democrats facing it.
Indeed. Yeah, and I mean, look, this is the difference, isn't it, between us on the right of politics, Charlie, and those on the left. Of course, we're not saying, oh, let's deplatform Rory Stewart, but shouldn't we just realise now, Charlie, that virtually any prediction Rory Stewart makes alongside Alistair Campbell is going to be the wrong one. They are on the wrong side of history on virtually every major political issue.
Yeah, he reliably gets all of his predictions and takes wrong, almost completely incorrect, like in the inverse of what actually has happened. But there comes times in politics, especially in this country, where these figures emerge that they embody a certain vibe, they embody a certain aspect of the current culture. And I think Rory Stewart, in a lot of ways, actually is the true face of conservatism in Britain. And by that, I mean the kind of conservatism associated with the Conservative Party, in that he is a kind of effete, softly spoken, skinny, liberal man without much in the way of strong opinions. He's not overly offensive in the way that some of these other kind of liberal people are. Like, he's not unpalatable. Like, he doesn't seem like an unpleasant person to be around, but he's just so incredibly weak in his views, in his convictions, in his ideas about what constitutes good government, in the way that the country should be run, and this sort of thing. And so I think in a weird sort of way, he's actually quite an instructive figure, because we can look to him and understand a certain aspect of the way that our elites think. Because like I say, I think he does actually embody a lot of their beliefs. So actually, like Chris, I agree that he should continue to have a platform, because he is actually, in a strange sort of way, quite an educational figure, because he does represent this style of politics that is just so outdated and so disconnected from the concerns of ordinary people.
And you would say, presumably, a good example as to why the Uni Party, why the Conservative Party needs to be effectively replaced on the right.
Totally. I mean, if you put a guy like Rory Stewart, I mean, the fact that he's alongside Campbell is quite funny, because if you put him in a room with, for example, Blair, who is ultimately the architect of the present system that we live under, that has done so much damage to our country through things like mass migration, but also the complete transformation of our political institutions and all the rest of it, I think that they would find very little to disagree on, because they are very much cut from the same cloth, very much of the same political type. They, again, have the same ideas about what constitutes good government. And the fact alone that is the case, the fact that he was a Conservative MP and that Blair was the leader of the Labour Party, I think tells you all you need to know about the absolute hair's breadth of difference between those two parties, even to this day, even after all of the 14 years of chaos that they inflicted on us. And they still appear not to, and of course, Stewart isn't in the mainstream Conservative Party anymore, but he still represents, I think, a contingent of that party very, very much. I think he is completely reflective of the liberal wing of the Conservative Party. So yeah, I think that those types need to be chased out of mainstream politics, because they've had their time and they've done enough damage to the country already.
Yes, exactly. Get out of mainstream politics, Rory Stewart. Look, let's move on to number 18. And 2024 was the year that the Loose Women decided to accuse me of racism simply for pointing out the woke hypocrisy of ITV, which suggests it's a terrible crime to have an all-white panel on any show, but when there is an all-black panel, it must be celebrated. I'll explain here, watch. She went crazy. She lost the plot. Writing, "Bitterness is a very lonely colour, Dan. Black women face some of the worst abuse on social media. That is a fact." So this man with a following of almost 500,000, well, it's actually over 500,000, Charlene, decides to target 4 black women for having successful careers, riling the racists for clout and clicks. It really is the weirdest pastime. Now, you saw what I said. I absolutely didn't target 4 black women for having a successful career. I certainly didn't want to rile any racists. I wasn't doing that. I was talking about the complete hypocrisy of ITV having one rule for the majority population in the country and then one rule for another. And I do think this is a discussion that we have to have. And what I find particularly infuriating is that I'm a gay man. I mean, I don't like talking about it. It's such a tiny part of me. But imagine if every time I was criticized, I tried to start saying, it's homophobia. No, we have to be able to have these debates without the inciting racism, the inciting hate thing being thrown around. But Judy Love, apparently this woman is a comedian. I mean, I've never heard her say anything funny, but she joined in saying, she's on the panel, by the way, saying, well, someone was bored today. However, inciting hate and racism towards 4 hardworking, successful black women really shows the low level some are willing to go for attention. It's crazy how much it bothers some to see us on TV. But guess what? We'll be back again soon. Doesn't bother me to see them on TV at all. Charlie Downes, for me, this was not an issue of race whatsoever. It was an issue of hypocrisy, because woke ITV is the broadcaster that has decided, despite the fact that we remain a majority white country, is just doing a terrible, terrible thing if there ever happens to be a group of 4 people that are all white.
Well, this is the funny thing about the the language games that the left tend to play, where, for example, the word diversity, it seems to, in terms of the revealed preference, seems to just mean like the fewer white people you have in a space, the more diverse it is. And so this panel, despite being made up of 4 people who share the same identity credentials, they're all women, all black, that is 100% diverse in the mind of the leftist, which is kind of, again, it's doublespeak, it's completely backwards. But I think, this kind of, it's amazing what this kind of American style left-wing identity politics does to a person's mind, where these women were talking as if they were being, somehow oppressed, victims of what you were saying, when what you were saying was a perfectly reasonable criticism. These are people who are in the media, they are on camera, they presumably, earn a decent amount of money. These are people who are, far from oppressed. And yet this kind of mindset where all you see is oppressor and oppressed, victims and perpetrators, what that does is you then just see that everywhere. And this was also the case with a certain Meghan Markle, who I think that we're going to speak about later, possibly. But this was somebody who was at the very heights, in the very heights of elite circles, literally part of the royal family, who still got this idea into her head, or at least, expressed an idea that she was somehow a victim, somehow oppressed. And these types all seem to belong to that same kind of category. And it's, whether it's dishonesty, I expect a lot of it is dishonesty. I think a lot of it is just playing language games and trying to get one up on people. But at the same time, I think a lot of these people are true believers. I think a lot of these people, despite being in these elite spheres, in the media, in politics and so on, they do actually think that somehow they are beneath, ordinary people who, don't share their identity credentials. It's very strange.
Well, you are right, by the way, to also point out that they all come from a particular subset of the population. I actually spoke to insiders at ITV who said they were so concerned that ITV believes this represents diversity because these are 4 black women who all come from a similar background, Afro-Caribbean, I believe, and all live in London. Now, that isn't diversity, is it? Can I just point out, though, too, I never actually said that ITV was somehow wrong to have a panel like this. I just pointed out how woke ITV does diversity. I just said this is their definition of diversity. Now, Chris Davies, that post prompted Charlene White to describe me as racist.
Well, Dan, I think if you'd gone the whole hog and described it as a horribly black panel, then perhaps you might.
Then I might be in trouble, right? But it's fine the other way around when Adjoa Ando says it on the day of the King's coronation, terribly white.
I'm sure Adjoa will be tuning in zealously to this particular show because, of course, we've got a horribly white panel today. But Dan, Charlie's got this on the nose. The hypocrisy on the left when it comes to identity politics really does stick in the craw. Because it is one rule for them and one rule for us. You know that, I know that. We all know where critical race theory and diversity, equity and inclusion are going. And I very much hope on the 20th, when Trump is inaugurated, that he and Musk and everyone else associated with the new presidency drive it out of the US, and that in turn, when they sneeze, we catch a cold and it is driven out of the United Kingdom, because it needs to go. We are a white British country that has minorities from the black, Asian and various other communities. And for the most part, people live side by side in the real world. Some refuse to assimilate. That's a different conversation for another day. But the majority of people get along and they are colourblind. I know you to be colourblind, Dan. I know I am myself. I believe Charlie to be. So this nonsense needs to be filed under in the bin for 2024.
Absolutely. That is how I grew up, believing in a colourblind society. But the thing is, what we learn is that if you judge people by your history, no one is safe. Because I should have just reminded Charlene White that her relatives were actually slave owners, something she was very horrified to discover in a documentary. And Sunny Hostin, the co-host of The View, the holier-than-thou co-host of The View in the US, also recently discovered that her relatives were slave owners as well. So there's something wrong, isn't there, Charlie, about judging anyone based on their sins, potentially, of people who are long gone.
Yeah, it's very, very silly. I mean, I am personally of the belief that the paradigm of kind of liberal individualism is in the rearview mirror. I think that we are in a world of identity now, for better or worse, which is why I don't instinctively dismiss identity politics out of hand, because I think if this is the game we're playing, if the game we're playing is group identity, then we need to play that game. We shouldn't be afraid of playing that game. But I would also add that this idea of left-wing hypocrisy, I think it kind of misunderstands the left-wing mind, because in their mind, it's not hypocritical to say that an all-black panel is good and an all-white panel is bad, because the framework that they operate out of is fundamentally just friends and enemies. If people I like do it, then it's good. If people I don't like do it, then it's bad. And that's the mindset politically of a child. But at the same time, it's a mindset that we see everywhere. This is, this was written about in the middle of the 20th century by Carl Schmitt. This is the friend-enemy distinction. And once again, if we don't understand how these people think, then we can't hope to combat them. Because if we just think that they're stupid, if we just think that they are illogical and irrational and silly, then we don't take them seriously enough, because these people and these ideas are actually dangerous, as we should well know by now. And it's not as simple as just saying that they're hypocrites, because they know that they're hypocrites and they don't care, because in their mind, hypocrisy is not some kind of moral failing. To us, to reasonable people who think that moral consistency is an important thing and, another fusty old idea, then it does matter. But to them, it doesn't, because their goals and the achievement of power and domination over people is what's most important. And they operate from a framework of the means justifying the ends. So sure, it is hypocritical for them to behave in this way. And it's hypocritical for them to attack some people for their historical background and for the actions of their ancestors and not others. But they don't care about that. And so calling them out on that basis, I don't think gets it right. I think what we should be doing is we should be pointing out the fact that these ideas are making, ordinary people's lives worse. And this is a political faction who nominally cares about ordinary people. But, these ideas are massively damaging.
No, I think that's very well put, actually. But I will just put it on the record here. Charlene White, I'm not going to judge you because your 5 times great-grandfather, John Stanbury, was a slave owner. I promise I'm not going to judge you for that. We can move on. At number 17, Tommy Robinson jailed. Watch this. Well, Alex Phillips interviewed Tommy for her brilliant new Substack, That's What She Said, just before he went to jail. And it was an absolutely fascinating exchange. Watch this.
No one wants to sit down with us. No one, still now. No one wants to sit down and talk to us. So if no one wants to sit down and talk to us, our place was on the street.
When people do want to raise the topics of multiculturalism, 2 tiers, all the rest of it, it's easier for people to say to you, well, it's far-right thugs.
Muslims are people. If you hate Muslims, it's a problem. 100,000 people on the street. 800,000 people are watching live. Show me any political party or any politician that can do that. They can't. What people like to do is to make themselves feel comfortable about talking about this issue, they bash me first.
Chris Davies, how did you feel about Tommy Robinson ending the year behind bars?
Dan, we know this is a disgrace. We know it's persecution. We know it's absolutely nothing to do with anything other than suppressing Tommy's voice because his opinion does not chime with the narrative of the government. And regardless of whichever the blue or the red or the yellow ribbon of the Uniparty was in power, Tommy would have ended up behind bars. Tommy is seen as the enemy. Every government has to have one. He's public enemy number one. I just want people to reflect on the fact that the offence that Tommy committed was a civil offence, and yet he's in a maximum security prison in isolation for 23 and a half hours a day. And then just determine whether or not comparing that with Hugh Edwards, who received penetrative paedophilic material and has not served a single day in prison, whether that is justice. Because by any notion of common sense and decency, it most definitely is not.
Charlie Downes, where do you stand on the jailing of Tommy Robinson?
Well, it's funny when this man, Tommy Robinson, comes up in kind of polite society, there's a collective intake of breath. It's a bit, oh gosh, here we go. But I think that we have to look at Tommy Robinson as a phenomenon, right? Because he clearly, as he stated in that clip that you just showed, he clearly, for many years at this point, has tapped into a feeling that is reasonably widespread, which is a sense of voicelessness, a sense of dissatisfaction with the way that our country is going. Do I think that he is perfect? Not by a long shot. I think that he's made a great many mistakes. But again, unless this is addressed, unless the phenomenon that he represents is addressed by either a mainstream political party or somebody who is prepared to have these kinds of conversations, I think you're only going to see the Tommy Robinson phenomenon growing, and it will likely only get uglier all the while it's kept out of polite society. Because these, as much as I think Tommy Robinson, as I said, has made mistakes, a lot of the concerns that he raises, especially about the proliferation of Islam, the ideology, the literal interpretation across our country, and immigration and all this sort of thing, these are very reasonable concerns which tend to impact working class communities more so than anybody else. And these are communities who, again, are nominally represented by the Labour Party. But I think if you talk to people on the ground, they feel that the Labour Party has completely abandoned them. The Labour Party is the party of the managerial class. The Labour Party is the party of the, for example, the women, the people on Loose Women, and the people who are on the production side of Loose Women. That's who the Labour Party actually represents. And so there is no mainstream representation for conservative-minded working class people. I think that part of the reason we saw Reform do so well at the general election in the Red Wall is because they are tapping into these concerns. Now, of course, figures in Reform like Richard Tice have distanced themselves from Tommy Robinson. Is that savvy politics? Maybe it is. For a long time, association with Tommy Robinson has been political kryptonite, so perhaps it's intelligent. But at the same time, the way in which these concerns are just dismissed by these sorts of people, I don't think is helpful, because again, these concerns are going to continue to exist anyway, and if you don't bring them into the light, if you don't allow them to have a voice in mainstream politics, then they go underground, and then you start to see the emergence of something a lot more ugly, quite frankly. And again, am I saying that that's unjustified? I don't know. I mean, these are very reasonable concerns, and if they're not given a reasonable hearing, people are going to get angrier and angrier and angrier, and I think that's what we're seeing happen in real time in Britain.
Chris Davies, do you think 2025 is the year that Tommy Robinson goes mainstream? Or because of the Reform UK response to his movement and that lot comments, actually that's justification for the mainstream media to continue to not just vilify him, but actually sometimes pretend he doesn't exist?
I don't think Tommy will ever be regarded as classically mainstream, but you raise a very interesting point with Reform, because they're schizophrenic when it comes to Tommy. You can ask Farage and Richard Tice their opinion, and as we know, Tice referred to those, most of whom voted for Reform, that assembled in Trafalgar Square and Downing Street as that lot, and then contrast that with Rupert Lowe, who seems to take a slightly different position. Contrast that with Alex Phillips, who certainly takes a different position.
Yes. Yeah.
So Reform themselves are in a quandary as to what to do about Tommy Robinson. The state solution is to lock Tommy up, and they will keep locking him up. This will not be the last prison time that Tommy serves. He knows that, and yet he continues to be a freedom fighter for the truth. And Charlie's quite right. Tommy has not been foot perfect. He never will be. He will continue to make mistakes. He's a flawed human being. Does that mean he should be in prison? Absolutely not. He is a politically persecuted man.
Indeed, and 2024 was the year where, unfortunately, there are a lot of political prisoners in the UK. Let's move on in the countdown now to number 16, Justin Welby, the woke Archbishop of Canterbury, forced out after proving, actually, that he should lose his woke credentials by covering up a massive sex scandal. Right now, Justin Welby, the uber woke Archbishop of Canterbury, has finally resigned for being part of the disgraceful John Smith abuse scandal and cover-up. Now, isn't it revolting? I mean, I say good riddance, by the way, to Justin Welby, but isn't it revolting that so often we find it is the most woke and the most judgmental in society who are the ones covering up for historically despicable behaviour? So look, Bernie, I want to remind everyone that Welby was the man, because a lot of people who will forget this, but Welby was the man who went against the will of the people by consistently slamming Brexit, linking it to Trump and fascism, while calling the EU the greatest dream realised for human beings since the fall of the Western Roman Empire. He called the Rwanda deportation plan ungodly. So he was effectively endorsing an open borders policy. He shamefully shut churches during the COVID lockdown. He allowed the persecution in the Church of England of our very own Father Calvin Robinson. So you get the drift about this guy. Downes. He was a woke hero. And isn't it funny? All of these woke heroes who are so judgmental of others are always the ones that are actually truly morally corrupt.
I think you are totally right to highlight that, because so often we see that a lot of these people who, what it is they tend to prioritize people who are sort of quite far away from them, abstract categories, basically, which is what the entirety of woke ideology is all about. It's about abstract categories, the black community, the gay community, or the LGBT community, whatever. And that's because I think, generally speaking, it is a way of being moral without having to actually do anything yourself. You just state your virtues, and that's enough. And it's no surprise that that quite often attracts people who are personally, deeply, morally corrupt. Now, I think Justin Welby is probably a fairly mild example of this. I think we've had far worse people who profess left-wing politics.
The aforementioned Hugh Edwards, for example.
Well, yes. Indeed, you know, who have come out to have committed heinous crimes. But on the ideology that has infested the Church of England, I actually have a kind of personal story on this. So I went to a Church of England school when I was a child, primary school, and I went to the local church as part of that, and it was not something I ever really got into when I was a child. But I don't tend to speak publicly about my faith, but I am a Christian, and that's been a fairly recent kind of rediscovery for me. And I started off by going back to the Church of England because I thought, well, that's where I started off. That's where I have my roots. But I've got to tell you, Dan, I mean, I went to the Church of England that I went to when I was a child, and the people there were absolutely lovely, really nice people. But the actual quality of the worship and the kinds of things that were being spoken about, I was sitting there like it's almost political, and it shouldn't be political. It was political in a way that was off-putting, and there was a kind of lack of seriousness to it, which I, as a young man in the modern world that feels so spiritually emaciated, I was searching for something deep, something quite, powerful, and it just didn't have that. And I think that a large reason that the church in Britain and across the West, quite frankly, is dying is because it's not offering people anything of substance. It is this kind of very watered down, trying to appeal to people and be relevant kind of faith. But actually, that's not what people need, because that's the entirety of pop culture has that kind of flavor about it. I think if the church wants to truly appeal, especially to young men, by the way, It needs to get away from this kind of thing. It needs to completely abandon this kind of thing. And I would hope that we would see that happen in the Church of England. I hope that there is a realization that this kind of politicization of the church, this kind of seeking to appeal to people by being kind of cool and trendy has failed and has actually had the opposite effect. So, Justin Welby, again, in the way that we spoke about Rory Stewart earlier, he's one of these figures that embodies a zeitgeist. He embodies a certain aspect of the current era. And I hope that him leaving the Church of England spells the end of that. Will it? I mean, we'll see.
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it, Chris Davies? I mean, fascinating insight there from Charlie. And actually, maybe Justin Welby's biggest crime was allowing the woke mind virus to completely infiltrate the Church of England.
I don't think, sadly, that the departure of Welby will see any improvement in the overall positioning of the Church of England. I don't think we've had a decent Archbishop of Canterbury down since Robert Runcie, who you will recall fought in the war with honours. There's no question the Church of England is morally and intellectually bankrupt. Welby has overseen, in his own special way, its continued demise. He's accelerated it. And I think the Church of England, sadly, is beyond recovery. I think Calvin Robinson had the right idea. Make him Archbishop of Canterbury. He'll abolish the Church of England and reconnect to Rome. And I think it's interesting because I don't see the drop in numbers in the Catholic Church that you do in the Church of England, where, every Sunday without fail, the church pews are basically empty in the vast majority of churches up and down this country. And I'm not advocating for a return to papacy per se, but I can understand completely where Calvin's coming from. And I think Charlie makes an excellent point here. This is not about being cool or hip or trendy or modern. That's not what people are looking for when it comes to spirituality. We all are on our own journey. And mine is not dissimilar to Charlie's in that I don't often talk about my faith. But what faith I do have is not going to be influenced by playing pop music rather than hymns. So I think the Church of England, unfortunately, is now probably beyond repair. How it begins to turn itself around, I have no idea, but it would need extremely strong leadership. And I can't think of anybody better than Calvin. Let's get him back to the UK, Dan, and put him in office.
Yes, indeed. I totally agree. Of course I do. At number 15, just a person, just a human being, the soon-to-be former presenter of Match of the Day, Gary Lineker. Watch. And the latest is Gary Lineker, who is the biggest gobshite on all of X. I think we can agree with that, even though it goes completely against the philosophy of the BBC and the fact that he is paid all of our license fee payer money and become really famous thanks to the BBC to express these views. But now he's saying that because of Elon Musk, he doesn't actually want to talk on Twitter, as he calls it. So he says, Calvin, I've changed my habits on Twitter. I don't really post my thoughts now because I think it has become not a very pleasurable experience. There was a time you could have little chats with people on there and a bit of banter, but now it is impossible because before I could have chats with people I either followed or were blue tick people, but now everyone's got a blue tick, so that doesn't work anymore. I've become a bit bored with it. It is a very unpleasant world, and Musk is clearly a very odd bloke. Yeah, you've got to be so odd, don't you, Calvin, to encourage freedom of speech. You know what's happened, Mr. Lineker? X is no longer your little left-wing echo chamber, and you don't like it because you're challenged. And how terrible that sometimes you're even challenged by ordinary folk without a blue tick. Although Chris Davies, he hasn't left. He's like these people like John Sopel who keep threatening to go over to this awful B-Sly or whatever it's called, and he refuses to go.
Dan, I think he's got from memory about 8 million followers, 8.2 million, that sort of number. Not that I stalk him because, funnily enough, Mr. Lineker doesn't appear on my timeline and I don't want him to. And every time he does, I doom scroll away at the fastest possible pace. He is part of that culture, as you say, of folks who threaten to leave, say they're going to leave, say they're never going to post again, but they, like crack cocaine, they just have to keep coming back for one more hit, one more hit, one more hit. Mr. Lineker was a reasonable footballer. He's not a particularly good football pundit. He's a terrible politician. He would be better off keeping his head down But again, a bit like we were saying earlier on, when it comes to others, he gives me many hours of happy amusement.
Yes.
When stories are always going to be there around Gary Lineker because of who he is. I don't know the man. I don't wish to know the man, but I do like laughing at him.
Indeed. I mean, look, he's an awful character. He is an awful character in lots of ways, which I won't get into right now. But I think, Charlie, at least this year we can celebrate the fact it's taken them far too many years, but he was axed by the BBC. He tried to spin the story as he was leaving, but fundamentally he wanted to return to Match of the Day, and the BBC finally decided to cut him loose. Now, as I say, I think he's done huge damage to the reputation of the BBC because he made Tim Davie, the Director General, look like an absolute fool. He got the job and said, we're not going to allow our presenters to take on any sort of political philosophy, but in the end, because Gary Lineker encouraged some sort of strike of his fellow presenters, Tim Davie had to capitulate. In fact, what Tim Davie should have done at that point was sack Gary Lineker and say, no. Doesn't matter how big you are, doesn't matter how famous you are, we will not have presenters who are being paid for by licence fee money turning into left-wing campaigners. It does our organisation too much damage. So I'd say good that he's gone, but probably too little too late, if you see what I mean.
Sure, yeah. I mean, as is, there seems to be an emerging theme in this episode, Dan. I think Gary Lineker, like Welby, like Rory Stewart, is an embodiment of a certain type of politics, which is, you know, we don't often talk about the fact that for all the good that democracy does, one of the negatives is that it politicizes the entirety of society, which is to say it makes everybody feel like they need to have a take, like, especially in the kind of 24-hour media cycle that we live in. Everybody has to have a take. Everyone has to have an opinion about every single issue. And Gary Lineker is an example of somebody who should not be in that kind of environment because his takes have consistently always been wrong and embarrassing for his employer as well. Just completely out of touch because he does inhabit this kind of this isolated world of, you know, media and sports. But this is what happens when you force everyone to have an opinion and when you give everyone a platform to sound off on those opinions. And again, I'm not saying Lineker's platform on X and elsewhere should be taken, but when it is a publicly funded broadcaster like the BBC, which in principle I'm not against existing, we can't have this kind of thing. We can't have politicization of spaces that need to uphold the ideal of impartiality. So I agree with you that he should have gone a lot earlier than he did because he's been doing this for years. I mean, when I was a kid, I remember, you know, Gary Lineker was a kind of eternal figure. He was always around. But then as I grew up and as he started to get a bigger and bigger, voice and a higher and higher opinion of his own political takes, I think I really started. It was a deeply off-putting thing, and I think this was a feeling shared by a lot of people. So again, it is a good thing that he's gone, but the rot in the BBC, the phenomenon that he represents, I think runs far deeper than just him. So again, it doesn't begin and end with this one figure leaving, and we can only hope that, you know, maybe the BBC starts to wake up to this sort of thing. But will they? Yeah, I highly doubt it.
No way. It's far too embedded within that organisation. But there were other disappointments in the mainstream media this year. At number 14, it's not just the BBC that continues to lurch to the hard left. LBC, or as I now call it, the Labour Broadcasting Company, has fundamentally changed. I did a little bit of a deep dive on this earlier in the year. LBC traditionalists desperately hoping the station might one day return to its roots as a centre-right force squarely aimed at the working classes and beloved by London's black cab drivers. Instead, the broadcaster's stars now regularly mock and pillory and shout down the type of callers that were once the bedrock of LBC's listenership, but who their hosts now seem to regard as sort of uneducated plebs.
Cultural Marxism, right. Culture is inflicted on the culture. So you're dividing the culture based on Marxist, a Marxist tool, a way of dividing, a way of...
Now, don't take this the wrong way, will you? But do you think any of that made sense?
Listen, mate.
You keep saying listen, mate, and then you get cross with me for listening. Why don't you just say what you wanted to say, and we'll both pretend that you know what you mean. So just say it.
Listen, mate. We haven't all been to posh schools like you, yeah.
You don't need to go to a posh school to know what Marx is. James, mate, why are you doing the victim stuff? Come on.
Listen.
The global-owned broadcaster has continued its further lurch to the left, even resulting in the station platforming Hamas-sympathising October 7th denialists as hosts. The hard leftist Saturday night presenter Natasha Devon had to issue a grovelling apology to keep her job after doubting that Hamas terrorists sexually assaulted Israeli victims on that dark day. And I mean, it just got worse over the course of the year, Chris Davies. I mean, they did get rid of Sangeeta Miska and Carol Vorderman. But look, James O'Brien runs that station now from the moment that he got rid of Nigel Farage. And it was him who got rid of Nigel Farage. It was gone. But it has just been this absolute, really disappointing decline, because you even see their right-wing presenters, and I say right-wing like that, they're completely muted now. Nick Ferrari and Ian Dale are too scared.
Dan, I think it's a terrible shame what's happened to LBC. As you said yourself, at one stage it was, I think centre-right might be pushing it a little bit, but it was certainly centrist, and it was certainly relatively neutral. And it certainly wasn't hostile to the right in the way that it is now. But the departure of Carol Vorderman was celebrated significantly in my house. She even blocked me on X, Dan. I mean, you know me, I'm a nice, cuddly, friendly bear. I don't mean any harm to anyone. So quite what I did to deserve her opprobrium, I've no idea, because she's all about inclusivity, apparently. But look, LBC is another dinosaur. It has fallen victim to the woke mind virus, and that's absolutely fine. There are plenty of other stations like Times Radio and the fake news agents that have gone in exactly the same direction. But thankfully, we've got Dan Wootton, Outspoken, and other independent media content providers, which is where we all get our news from, rather than there she is, Carol in all her finery with, don't put her next to a radiator, Dan. It would be very unfair.
Yeah, I mean, look, Charlie, I guess it's just a shame, because you know LBC used to be the channel of the black cab driver. And so as a result, they still do have a certain market infiltration. Although what I do find fascinating, because obviously I'm in this new world, a world that you know very well, the independent media and what's going on YouTube. And if you look at LBC on a new media platform, it's a complete disaster. Their numbers are tiny.
Yeah. Chris, it's interesting you bring up the newsagents, actually, because that is another show that's produced by Global, which obviously runs LBC. The great Charlotte Gill, she's an excellent journalist. I don't know if you guys know her.
Yeah, she was on the other day, actually. She's great.
Yeah, she's doing brilliant work on this topic, because she's highlighting the various tendrils of this organization, Global, and exactly what it is they're pushing. Because again, they produce LBC, they produce the newsagents, they produce a number of other shows. And more importantly, they actually own all of the advertising space on the tube and public transport in London, which is why you see some very strange things cropping up there. Like, for example, when the assisted dying bill was going through Parliament, you saw these very, very strange adverts where it was it was very dystopian. You know, these celebrations of the ability to commit suicide in a legal and medical way, this was essentially enabled and facilitated by Global. And so it's clear that this is a politically motivated organization. It's an organization that has political goals. I go on LBC from time to time. I'm brought on as a house right winger, if you want, and it's always a lot of fun because, as Chris said, they belong to this political paradigm that everybody outside of SW1 thinks is completely outdated and irrelevant, because they're still calling you racist if you dare to have the temerity to criticize, for example, Sadiq Khan. And I actually said this. I was on with the great Matt Fry earlier this year, and he said to me, he essentially accused me of being a racist in so many words. And I just said to him, like, look, to a previous generation, the response to that kind of accusation was, oh my gosh, no, I'm not. But to someone like me, I'm just like, do you realize
we're so used to it?
Yeah, it's just like it means literally nothing. Because for my entire adult life, everything has been racist. So you call me that, and it's like, oh, okay, you belong to the political establishment that nobody likes and nobody views as legitimate. So, I can kind of just step over it. It doesn't affect me.
And more for them, because they have completely undermined something that is important. You know, true racism is important, but the problem is as soon as you call anyone a racist who disagrees with you, then you've totally belittled something that actually really does matter. But very good point. Stand by, Charlie Downes. Chris Davies in just one moment. Meghan Markle makes the list. First, though, hot flashes, sleepless nights, weight gain, joint pain. I know a lot of you are dealing with or have dealt with these symptoms, especially the women in the Outspoken family. Now, obviously, I haven't experienced menopause firsthand, but I have heard from many of you about the challenges that come with it. So today, good news. By now, most of you have heard me talk about Verso. I've been taking their products since near the beginning of the year, and I have to be honest, transformed me last year. But today, I want to focus on all of you amazing women out there, especially those dealing with menopause or perimenopause. I've heard from so many of you about how tough this phase of life can be. Well, Selbene by Verso is designed to target those symptoms head on by addressing the root cause. It's formulated with ingredients that are proven to increase NAD+ levels. Now, that is huge because NAD+ is what keeps your cells healthy and energized, but it drops off as we age and especially during menopause. But here's the big thing. Boosting NAD+ can make a big difference to how you feel. So women who've taken Selbene are reporting some pretty amazing changes, actually. Hot flashes disappearing, more energy, joint pain relief, weight loss, and mental clarity. Some listeners have even told me their periods have come back or have become regulated. So they actually feel like they're turning back the clock on aging. That's not a surprise because the ingredients in Selbene have shown to balance hormones without going the traditional hormone therapy route. It also helps with inflammation and metabolism, which is especially helpful for managing weight and keeping you feeling your best. Plus, these research-backed ingredients have been shown to improve bone health, which is crucial for postmenopausal women at risk of osteoporosis. Now, what I love about Selbene, I think you will too, is that it doesn't just mask the symptoms of menopause, it tackles the root causes of aging, helping you feel stronger, healthier, and more energized from the inside out. So if you haven't tried it yet and you're ready to take back control of your health and feel more like yourself, click on the link in the description on YouTube or Rumble just below this video in the show notes, or head on over to buy.ver.so/outspoken. If you use the coupon code outspoken today, when you check out, you will save 15% on your first order. Believe me, this is the perfect way to start the year, because if you're tired of the sleepless nights, the hot flashes, or just feeling off, you can give Selbene a try. It helped me so much. Gosh, last year now. It feels so weird saying that. Last year. But absolutely, I'm going to be continuing to take it in 2025. So to repeat, that's buy.ver.so/outspoken. Use the coupon code outspoken. But now, back to the show. Meghan Markle faced a disaster in 2024 when the Hollywood Reporter, now this is a publication that should be on her side, revealed the truth about her dictator-like, bullying-like behavior. So, Lee, I want to kick off with the Hollywood Reporter because the Hollywood Reporter matters, okay? It is one of the most important publications for the entire entertainment industry. It is a Bible for the Hollywood elites. So this story is huge. Why Hollywood keeps quitting on Harry and Meghan is the headline. But then within this piece is a complete destruction of the way that Meghan Markle treats people. And in fact, this is just like the types of stories that I wrote during her time in the royal family and was accused, of course, of making things up or somehow being racist. But now her precious Hollywood types are saying exactly the same thing. So, what is the key quote? This is a source close to Harry and Meghan, Lee, who says that everyone is leaving the employ of the Sussexes because, quote, everyone's terrified of Meghan. She belittles people. She doesn't take advice. They're both poor decision makers. They change their minds frequently. Harry is a very, very charming person, no airs at all, but he's very much an enabler, and she's just terrible. Now, this was an absolute major moment, Chris Davies, in the downfall of Meghan Markle in Hollywood, because you'll remember for a long time when there was the serious bullying allegation at Buckingham Palace, when there were all of the claims that I actually first reported, goodness me, back in 2018, so goodness, nearly 7 years ago now, about the fact that Catherine and Meghan had fallen out to begin with because of the way that Meghan was speaking to her staff at Kensington Palace. Because of the way, Chris Davies, Meghan was bullying her staff at Kensington Palace. Now, Meghan always tried to claim that we were somehow culturally insensitive for suggesting this. We just didn't understand, Chris Davies, how things worked in Hollywood. It was nothing to do with Meghan's behaviour. It was all to do with a certain British sensitivity. We just didn't understand. But that's not the case, is it? Because the Hollywood Reporter was only speaking to Americans, was only speaking to Hollywood figures whose description of her, as we just heard there, was completely damning.
Well, it's a very interesting relationship that Meghan Markle has with the truth, because it seems to bear no resemblance to anyone else's truth apart from her own. It's also interesting that karma, Dan, it takes a while, but it does come around. And considering the revelations in that so-called book of Harry's, it's quite remarkable now how things have shifted. When they first went to the States, I think people were reasonably excited to see them, those that have an interest in so-called celebrities, as the new kids on the block. But of course, as time passes, the Oprah interviews have dried up, interest in them has dried up, and so therefore she becomes more didactic, more tyrannical, more difficult to deal with. She's a diva about the size of Beyonce, but on a 50p budget, is the way I would best describe Madam Markle. And I think it would be lovely if they followed through on what they said they were going to do when they moved to Montecito and enjoyed the peace and quiet. And let's have the same from them.
I mean, they do not want peace and quiet, Charlie Downes, do they? But it's been a bad year in lots of ways. I mean, they only raised $1 million, which for them is utterly pathetic given the money that they raised for themselves. But I do think the worst moment of the year for Harry and Meghan were the revelations contained in the Hollywood Reporter, because all of a sudden you can't just write off the claims in the UK. And remember, there remains, Charlie, this bullying investigation under wraps at Buckingham Palace. We have never seen the results.
Yeah, well, I think this is key, this whole idea that they want a quiet life. I mean, I find it so tiresome talking about these two, because it's so obvious that...
Apologies.
For them, it's all good. Any attention is good attention for them. I think these are the types of people that we're dealing with here. She is another example. Again, she belongs to this kind of, what gets called woke phenomenon. But in her personal conduct, she is deeply unpleasant. She professes these, kind of left-wing, right-on
ideals,
views about the world. But actually, in the way that she treats people, by all accounts, allegedly, she's very unpleasant. And it's funny because, again, this is a political paradigm that seems to prioritize what you say rather than what you do. And that is crucial, I think. The brilliant Tim Dillon, American comedian, he called Meghan Markle just another sociopath with a logo. And I think that perfectly sums her up. She's somebody who seemingly is only interested in selling her product. She started a lifestyle brand. It was called something like American Riviera or something like that. It's clear that she's trying to sell a kind of aesthetic, but it's completely hollow. It's completely corporate, completely soulless. And I think that's what comes of, being this type of person, this kind of very unpleasant person, but who is at the same time moving in these elite media circles. It just makes you completely disconnected from reality. And I think that's her to a T.
Just another sociopath with a logo. Oh my goodness, I hadn't heard that. I absolutely love it.
Isn't it? Yes.
Who was that comedian?
Tim Dillon. He's a brilliant American comedian. Very funny.
Love it. That is perfectly put, because that is the reality, isn't it, Chris Davies? Royalty is such an honor, and I'll tell you why it's such an honor, because you don't have to work for a living, But you have the option, if you want to take it on, to bring real change to a few key issues. And you know, Chris, I'm a real monarchist. And that's not to say I support everything the royal family does or every member of the royal family. We know there have been some bad eggs. But if you look at members of the royal family who decide to use that unique power for good, so Queen Elizabeth II with the Commonwealth, for example, or Princess Diana, who Meghan Markle models herself on. But look at the issues and the causes that Meghan Markle changed forever. The way people dealt with HIV/AIDS patients, for example, the way people spoke about bulimia, the plight of landmines, and of course homelessness, which is a big project that Prince William is taking on. If you do royalty properly, you do have the opportunity to make real change. And Meghan Markle, I can't point to one cause that she has furthered or bettered. Can you?
No, Dan, she's a grifter. She would be well advised to stop attempting to be the 2025 answer to Diana, Princess of Wales, and to take a leaf out of the book of Princess Anne, who, in my opinion, is one of the most underrated, understated members of the royal family, who absolutely understands the privilege that she has and the duty and responsibilities that come with it in a way that Meghan Markle never could and never would. What's quite clear now is that when she married Prince Harry, the Duke of Sussex, as he is now, she had no intention of hanging around. I'm almost 100% convinced that this whole episode is playing out exactly as she intended it to, but with one obvious exception. She hasn't got the noughts on her bank balance that she hoped she would have by this point in the curve.
Indeed. So is there going to be another billionaire around the corner? Who knows? We will see. Time will tell. But at number 12, sticking with the royal theme, Narinda Kerr, who decided that it was right to attack Catherine, the Princess of Wales, over her appearance without just acknowledging the fact she'd gone through 6 months of brutal chemotherapy. Watch. The Good Morning Britain and Jeremy Vine panellist, big-time Labour activist too, Narinda Kerr, has blamed racism and sexism for the outcry over her deciding to criticise the so-called ageing looks of our glorious Catherine, the Princess of Wales, on Remembrance Sunday, without acknowledging that Kate has had to endure 6 months of grueling chemotherapy. Now, Narinda sparked international outrage. This has gone all around the world by writing on X, genuine question, why has Kate aged so much? Isn't she only 42? Is she a smoker? That's the only explanation. Oh, is it the only explanation? The only explanation? Really, Narinda? Well, you know I don't believe in deplatforming people. So I brought back The Clash to go one-on-one with Ms. Kerr.
Fan of the William and Kate, and I am
You're a troll
fan
of
Harry
them.
and Meghan.
You're a troll
No.
of them. You decided to raise her looks after 6 months of chemo. By the way, Narinda, you've got absolutely no evidence that Catherine is a smoker. How dare you suggest that? Because it's almost as if you're trying to say it's her fault that she's got cancer, and you're even trying to say she doesn't have cancer.
Flying News, as you said, Sky News, I did read that and think it's pre-cancer. There's so much misinformation. I'm not trolling Catherine. When I put that tweet out, trust me, it wasn't the best tweet, but I was thinking of smoking. I'd always gone about smoking to all my friends and family. They're a waste of money. They can give you cancer.
You have no idea that Catherine smoked.
There's pictures of Catherine. She used to smoke.
In 2007, there is a picture of Catherine with a packet of cigarettes in her bag. You have no evidence that she has ever touched a cigarette.
No, there is evidence out there. She was smoking on holiday.
Now, look, again, let me be very clear, Charlie Downes, I don't believe that people should be cancelled for what they say, but because I know a lot of people are saying, well, you shouldn't have had Narinda on and she should never get another media gig again. But actually, what I wanted to do there, Charlie, it was a very, very long interview, which people can obviously look back in our archive to find it. But what I wanted to do was actually prove that Meghan Markle's Sussex squad, of which I believe Narinda is a part, now this is her online gang, are actually just trolls. And it's a huge, it sort of displays a huge hypocrisy with Meghan and Harry, who are constantly talking about the need for safety, as they call it online. But they don't give a damn when it's their own people throwing mud at someone like Catherine, the Princess of Wales. Because it wasn't just this example this year, Charlie. You know, all sorts of allegations were made about Catherine. I mean, earlier this year, the Sussex squad, earlier last year, I need to get used to that, it's 2025. Earlier last year, the Sussex squad were trying to claim that Catherine may have been secretly killed by William.
Yeah, I mean, I do struggle with this, I'll be honest with you, Dan. I struggle with the fact that somebody like Narinda Kaur is able to make a living in this business, because she is somebody who is just so continuously unpleasant to people. You know, and sure, maybe she does deserve a platform. You know, again, I struggle with that, I have to be honest with you. But this is someone who is, you know, just like, she makes her money by being this way to people. I think that Catherine is a rare example in mainstream life of somebody who carries herself with dignity, who carries herself with grace, even having gone through what she's gone through in the last year. She is what an English queen should look like, quite frankly. I mean, she has all the credentials of a monarch. And I think that I don't know, just that kind of spirit, we don't see that anymore. We certainly don't see it from people like Meghan Markle or indeed her husband. But it's something that our nation is desperately crying out for. And it's no surprise that a gutter Labour activist like Narinda Kaur is trying to tear that down, because in a certain way, I think Princess Kate embodies everything that she hates, which is anything that smacks of grace, anything that smacks of regalness, anything that smacks of class, when actually the British spirit loves those things. But it's just these resentful people like her just can't stand it.
Chris Davies, where did you stand on this one?
Well, where I stand on this, Dan, as with a number of other people in the rundown, is that opinions are like backsides. Everybody's got one. And Narinda is a classic example of that. She is the lowest form of gutter pond life, to be honest with you. When it comes to racism and sexism, you know, if we're going to play Narinda bingo, you can almost predict before she comes on what she's going to say, that she will talk over people relentlessly. In my house, she's become Narinda Kettle, because as soon as she comes on, that's what I reach for. I turn the sound off and I put the kettle on. I hate to say it, Dan, even if she appeared on your show again, that's what would happen. I'd switch off. She is not a pleasant human being. She is someone who is motivated entirely by remaining in profile, in the public eye, but really what the substance of what she has to say and do, frankly, is not worth listening to and tolerating. So for me, don't take a platform away, don't take anyone's platform away. As a free speech absolutist who's just put his teeth back in, I don't want to see anyone lose their platform, but I do have the right to press the mute button.
Oh, yes, you do. You absolutely do. At number 11, Meghan Markle and Prince Harry's fake royal tour to Nigeria. Given how this has all become a PR exercise, I'm prepared to openly doubt the veracity of the test and would love to see the results. And by the way, I'm not the only one asking to see the proof. Outraged Nigerian commentators are quite rightly asking the question too.
43%. I don't understand, you know.
You want to see the proof?
Yes, definitely.
Okay.
Her actions tells me she's not a Nigerian. For example, if a Nigerian girl were lucky enough or whatever, marry into the royal family, I think she would know what to do. I think she would have respected her in-laws, because that's the way we were cultured. We have aunties, uncle, we have extended family. She would have respected her extended family. And before, you know, a Nigerian woman would have and the Queen's love and respect that she will start cooking jollof rice within the royal families. And I believe the Queen would have been eating jollof rice before she passed away.
And that would have been better.
Then I would have known she's a Nigerian woman. In all of the things that she has done, nothing. The only thing that I could say probably linked her to Nigeria is that she looked pretty like Nigerian women.
This is
Yep, totally. Also, Meghan, what the hell happened to Malta? Are you not interested in that island anymore because they're a little bit too white? Because that is the hilarious thing, Charlie Downes. At some point, Meghan Markle had claimed she was Maltese. This is the period when, remember, she was describing herself as Caucasian on her acting CV. Then all of a sudden she realizes, okay, I'm going to lean into my mother's cultural heritage because I've cut my white dad off. So she sends away for one of these DNA tests. Now, do we really believe it? Have we seen the results? And claims that she's 43% Nigerian. I think the Nigerians saw through it.
Well, it's interesting, isn't it? For all the talk of white privilege, it seems that the current culture that we live in and the media landscape that we operate in seems to encourage people to deny their whiteness, if you want, and prioritize those parts of their identity that aren't white. And I think we saw that with Meghan Markle. But, you know, with her, I think you just reap what you sow. I mean, she has given the public no reason to trust her. She's given the public no reason to trust her intentions and her motivations and this sort of thing. So I don't think it's any surprise that there was a lot of questions around this tour that they supposedly did. And again, a lot of it's not going to seem authentic just because of that world that she comes from, that being Hollywood. There's a sense that it's all for the cameras. There is a sense that it's all a PR exercise. And I think that's probably exactly what it was.
Yeah, it was a PR exercise because, I mean, Chris Davies, she was bestowed a Nigerian title on this visit, for example, that she said she would treasure, but she hasn't used it. Of course, she wants to keep being referred to as the Duchess of Sussex. And according to Angela Levin, our royal mastermind, insists that strangers now refer to her as Mom, which is very, very interesting for someone who seemed to have such a problem with the traditions of the British royal family.
Well, it does, Dan. I mean, where she perhaps has got some empathy with Nigerian roots is around the scammers, because she is one. And so I would wonder whether or not she asked anybody for their 16-digit number, expiry date, and the last 3 digits on the back of their card, because that's about her level. Look, we can talk about Meghan and Harry all day long. I don't have anything good to say. And my mother used to tell me if I didn't have anything good to say about somebody, not to say anything. But I'm here to comment, and so therefore I have. She is an odious, horrible human being. I did have the misfortune to meet her once in Ireland when she was with Harry at an event at the the UK embassy in the Republic of Ireland. And she was perfectly pleasant, but with a permanently fixed false grin. Look, these people are not to be trusted, Dan, and I frankly hope for a peaceful 2025 with much less involvement from Meghan and Harry. But I know from your point of view on Outspoken, she gives you hours of amusement and unlimited content. So therefore, in my own special way, I want her to be around.
Thank you. Well, look, you know what I view the job of Outspoken to do. It is about challenging untrue narratives in the mainstream media across the board, actually. And one of my specialisms is obviously royal reporting. I broke the story of Megxit, broke lots of the other stories about the bad behavior of Prince Harry and Meghan Markle within the royal family. So I like to think that I shine a light on just what they're really like, because that matters, right? Because they are trying to present to the world and actually make hundreds of millions of dollars. I mean, there's a real financial thing about presenting themselves as something they're not. So hopefully you get the real story here on Outspoken. But I'm sorry to both of you for putting you through that Harry and Meghan discussion. But look, it's been so brilliant to have you today. So brilliant to have you as part of Outspoken. Can't wait to see you later in 2025. And Happy New Year to Charlie Downes
Happy New Year,
and Chris
Dan.
Davies, our superstar panel today. And thank you for your company. No uncancelled after show. It returns very, very soon. But let me tell you, the best way that you can usually see the after show and support Outspoken is by subscribing at www.outspoken.live. There it is. This is my Substack. All you have to do, let me just explain it. See the little form there? You just need to enter your email address, hit subscribe, then you choose which membership you want. You can sign up completely for free, but if you do want the full access to the Uncancelled After Show, all of my columns, exclusive reporting, there is a monthly paid membership from just £5 plus VAT each month. But I'd love you to be part of the Outspoken community. It's really, really important that we have that communication and that feeling of community, but also, most importantly, and this is why I really encourage people to get to my Substack, it is totally free of censorship, which unfortunately not many platforms in the world are these days. So www.outspoken.live. Please do join the Outspoken community. As I say, you can sign up completely for free. I'd love you to subscribe if you're watching on Rumble or YouTube as well. And very excitingly, tomorrow, we have the top 10 of the worst of 2024. Who do you think is going to top the list? Find out 5 p.m. UK time, midday Eastern, 9 a.m. Pacific. Thank you for your company. And most importantly, I promise to keep fighting for you.